Before the Mali Empire rose to greatness, before the wealth of gold transformed kings into legends, before Timbuktu became a beacon of global scholarship, there was a land filled with people, cultures, kingdoms, and histories that stretched far back in time. To understand Mali, you must first understand the world that existed before it. A world shaped by geography, trade, migration, war, religion, and tradition. The region we now call West Africa was not empty land. It was a vibrant and complex world. Stretching from the Atlantic coast inward to the Niger River, the land featured a mixture of savanna, grasslands, forests, hills, and rivers. At the center was the mighty Niger River, the lifeline of the region. It allowed farming, fishing, transportation, and communication. It connected inland kingdoms to long-distance traders from North Africa and beyond. The people living here belonged mainly to the Mande ethnic group, one of the oldest and most influential cultural groups in African history. The Mande were made up of many subgroups, including the Mandinka, Soninke, Bambara, Daila, Bozo, and more. They shared language, customs, oral traditions, and family structures that helped bind their society together long before Mali became an empire. Among these groups, the Soninke people had already built a powerful civilization centuries earlier, the Ghana Empire, also known as Ouagadougou. Ghana controlled much of the trans-Saharan trade from the 5th to the 11th century. They taxed caravans, controlled gold mines, and built early models of African kingship that later influenced Mali. But Ghana eventually declined due to droughts, internal conflicts, shifting trade routes, and external pressure from North African armies like the Almoravids. As Ghana weakened, new powers began to rise. Among them was the Sosso Kingdom, led by the powerful and feared King Sumanguru Kente. The Sosso were once vassals of Ghana. But after Ghana declined, the Sosso used iron weapons and military power to dominate neighboring peoples, including the Mandinka. Sumanguru was ambitious, cunning, and deeply feared by his enemies. He conquered regions, demanded tribute, and attempted to rebuild an empire under his control. Villages that resisted were punished. Rulers who challenged his authority were removed. Many Mandinka clans were forced to submit and accept harsh tribute. In some traditions, he was described as a powerful sorcerer, a man feared not only for military strength but for spiritual force. At this time, the Mandinka people lived mostly in small kingdoms and clans. They were governed by chiefs from noble families, including the Keita dynasty in the region of Kangaba. The Keita family traced its lineage to ancient hunters known as the Lion Kings, believed to be chosen by spirits and ancestors to lead the people. They were respected but not yet dominant. They lived by farming, cattle rearing, iron working, and local trade. Even before Mali rose, the Mandinka had a structured society. There were nobles, warriors, hunters, griots, the historians and storytellers, blacksmiths, leatherworkers, and traders. Griots played a central role. They preserved history, memorized genealogy, advised kings, and performed music. Without griots, much of African history would have been lost. Religion in this pre-Mali period was a mixture of indigenous spiritual beliefs and early Islamic influence. Islam had begun spreading through traders from North Africa, but it was not yet dominant. Most people still practice traditional African spirituality, involving ancestors, nature spirits, sacred groves, protective charms, and rituals led by priests and priestesses. The people lived with a deep respect for lineage. Families were large and interconnected. Marriage alliances were used to settle disputes. Land was shared and managed by extended families. Children grew up surrounded by grandparents, cousins, uncles, and aunts. Storytelling was central. Children sat around fires at night listening to tales of creation, heroes, hunters, and kings. But despite this rich cultural life, the Mandinka people were under threat. The Sosso Kingdom's expansion created fear. Villages paid heavy tribute. Families lost their freedom. Leaders were replaced. Hope was fading. Griots began whispering ancient prophecies about a future king, a child of destiny who would unite the Mandinka and defeat their oppressors. Whether the prophecy came before or after the events, the people believed it strongly. The land was changing. Trade was shifting. Islam was spreading. Kingdoms were rising and falling. Power was moving. And in the middle of this changing world, the foundation for something greater was being laid. Out of struggle would come unity. Out of oppression would come liberation. Out of fear would come courage. And out of an unexpected place, a new hero would emerge. This is the world that would eventually give birth to the Mali Empire. If you enjoy this kind of deep, detailed African history, remember to follow and subscribe for more powerful content that tells our true stories. The story of the Mali Empire cannot be told without understanding the extraordinary life of the man who founded it, Sundiata Keita. His life is one of the most important historical and cultural narratives in West Africa. It is preserved through oral tradition, especially by the griots, the living libraries of the Mandinka people. Sundiata's story begins long before his birth. The griots speak of an ancient prophecy. A prophecy that said a great king would rise from the Keita lineage. But this king would not come from the strongest or the most favored. Instead, he would come through a woman who was mocked, underestimated, and considered unworthy by many. Sundiata's father, Nair Magan Khan VIII, king of the small Mandinka kingdom of Kangaba, had many wives. But one day, a powerful hunter visited him. This hunter, respected for his spiritual insight, told the king that he would soon meet a woman who looked unusual, perhaps even strange, but she would bear him a child destined to become a great ruler, a king whose influence would touch lands far beyond Kangaba. Not long after, two hunters arrived at the court with a woman they had freed from captivity. Her name was Sogolan Keju. She was described as quiet, humble, and physically different. She had a curved spine, a limp, and unusual features. People called her the Buffalo Woman, but not to her face. She was treated with suspicion and whispers. But the king recognized the truth behind the prophecy and married her. In time, Sogolan gave birth to a son, Sundiata, also called Marijata. But when Sundiata was born, the prophecy seemed to fall apart. The child could not walk. Years passed, and he still crawled on the ground while other children ran, played, and learned to fight. His mother's co-wives mocked her. They insulted her child, calling him useless and weak. Sogolan endured humiliation, but she continued to love her son fiercely. She believed in the prophecy even when others doubted. Sundiata grew up listening carefully. He observed people. He learned through the mind, even when his body failed him. His spirit remained unbroken. And inside him, something powerful was building, patience, understanding, and the silent strength of someone destined for greatness. One day, the insults reached a painful point. According to tradition, Sogolan was mocked so harshly that she cried openly in front of the household. Sundiata, still young, saw his mother's tears. And something changed inside him. He asked that an iron rod be brought to him, a strong rod meant for blacksmiths. With determination, he pulled himself up. His muscles trembled. The rod bent under the weight of his struggle. But he stood. For the first time in his life, he stood tall. The household fell silent. A boy who had never walked had just straightened himself through sheer will. It was a moment that would never be forgotten. The prophecy had begun to reveal itself. From that day forward, Sundiata began walking, running, training, and learning the skills of leadership and warfare. He grew strong, wise, and observant. His father, Nair Magan, saw that Sundiata had the potential to inherit the throne. But royal politics are rarely simple. Before the king died, he was pressured to appoint another son, Dankaran II-man, the child of a different wife, as his successor. This decision would later trigger jealousy, conflict, and betrayal. After Nair Magan's death, Sogolon and her children became targets of the new ruling faction. Dankaran II-man and his mother saw Sundiata as a threat. They wanted him gone. Their fear grew as Sundiata became more beloved by the people and more respected by warriors. So they plotted to push him out. To protect her children, Sogolon decided to leave Kingaba. She took Sundiata, his siblings, and a small group of supporters. Their exile marked the beginning of a long journey that would shape Sundiata into the leader he was destined to become. Sundiata grew up listening carefully. He observed people. He learned through the mind, even when his body failed him. His spirit remained unbroken. And inside him, something powerful was building: patience, understanding, and the silent strength of someone destined for greatness. One day, the insults reached a painful point. According to tradition, Sogolon was mocked so harshly that she cried openly in front of the household. Sundiata, still young, saw his mother's tears. And something changed inside him. He asked that an iron rod be brought to him, a strong rod meant for blacksmiths. With determination, he pulled himself up. His muscles trembled. The rod bent under the weight of his struggle. But he stood. For the first time in his life, he stood tall. The household fell silent. A boy who had never walked had just straightened himself through sheer will. It was a moment that would never be forgotten. The prophecy had begun to reveal itself. From that day forward, Sundiata began walking, running, training, and learning the skills of leadership and warfare. He grew strong, wise, and observant. His father, Nair Magan, saw that Sundiata had the potential to inherit the throne. But royal politics are rarely simple. Before the king died, he was pressured to appoint another son, Dankaran II-man, the child of a different wife, as his successor. This decision would later trigger jealousy, conflict, and betrayal. After Nair Magan's death, Sogolon and her children became targets of the new ruling faction. Dankaran II-man and his mother saw Sundiata as a threat. They wanted him gone. Their fear grew as Sundiata became more beloved by the people and more respected by warriors. So they plotted to push him out. To protect her children, Sogolon decided to leave Kingaba. She took Sundiata, his siblings, and a small group of supporters. Their exile marked the beginning of a long journey that would shape Sundiata into the leader he was destined to become. Sundiata and his family traveled through several kingdoms. Everywhere they went, they found both kindness and hardship. In the kingdom of Wagadu, the old Ghana Empire, they were welcomed by the king, who recognized Sundiata's potential. Later, in Mima, Sundiata grew into manhood. The king of Mima treated him like a son and trained him in statecraft, warfare, and leadership. It was in Mima that Sundiata first proved himself as a warrior, leading troops in battle and gaining fame for his courage, fairness, and strategic mind. But while Sundiata grew stronger in exile, his homeland fell deeper into suffering. The Sosso king, Sumanguru Kante, invaded the Mandinka regions. He dethroned Dankaran II-man, placed oppressive demands on the people, and ruled with fear. Sumanguru was known for both physical power and rumored mystical abilities. His armies were fierce, his rule was harsh, and the Mandinka people lived in desperation. In their suffering, the elders and chiefs remembered the old prophecy. They remembered the young prince who had shown miraculous strength. They remembered Sundiata, the child of destiny. They sent messengers across the land, searching for him. After years of exile, they found him in Mima. They begged him to return and free his people. They told him that the homeland needed him. That the people believed in him. That destiny was calling. Sundiata agreed. He gathered allies from the places he had visited during his exile. Kings who respected him sent warriors. Friends who had trained beside him offered support. The Mandinka people rose with renewed hope. Sundiata marched back toward his homeland with an army unified under one purpose. This would lead to the historic Battle of Kirina in 1235, where Sundiata and his allies faced Semanguru in the decisive conflict that would change West African history forever. But that battle belongs to the next chapter. For now, it is enough to understand that Sundiata Keita's greatness was not just in his victory. It was in his perseverance. His resilience. His ability to unite people. His wisdom gained through hardship, exile, and patience. He was the child who could not walk. The youth who bent an iron rod. The exile who gained strength from foreign lands. The leader who returned to free his people. And the founder of an empire that would rise to global prominence. If you're enjoying this incredibly detailed documentary narration, don't forget to follow and subscribe for more powerful African history. The story of the Mali Empire cannot be told without telling the story of Sundiata Keita. In fact, the entire foundation of Mali rests on his life, his struggles, and his destiny. This chapter is dedicated to understanding who he was, what shaped him, how he rose from humiliation to greatness, and why his legacy remains immortal across West Africa. We begin in the early 1200s, in the kingdom of Kangaba, one of the many small Mandinka states that existed before the rise of Mali. Kangaba was ruled by a man named Magan Khan Fata, also called Magan the Handsome. He was a respected Mansa, known for wisdom and diplomacy. But the most important moment of his life was not a war or a great victory, rather, it was a prophecy. A famous hunter from a faraway land visited Magan Khan Fata and told him something strange. He said that if the king married a woman who would soon arrive, described as physically unusual and mocked by society, she would give birth to a son who would become one of the greatest kings Africa had ever known. This prophecy would later shape the destiny of an entire empire. Not long after, a woman named Sogolan arrived in Kangaba. She was often described as unattractive by people who met her, with a bent back and features that made others whisper. But she was no ordinary woman. She was known to possess tremendous spiritual strength and deep knowledge of the unseen world. Magan Khan Fata remembered the prophecy and married her, despite the whispers and mockery of others. From this union, in 1217 or 1218, a child was born, Sundiata Keita. His birth fulfilled the prophecy, but there was one problem: Sundiata did not walk. In fact, he could not even stand. As he grew older, he still crawled. Many children mocked him. Even some adults whispered that the king's son was cursed. His disability made him the subject of constant ridicule. Meanwhile, Magan Khan Fata had other wives, one of whom wanted her own son, Dankaran II-Man, to inherit the throne. This stepmother constantly harassed Sogolan and her children. She used Sundiata's inability to walk as ammunition, calling him a weak boy unfit for kingship. After the death of Magan Khan Fata, Dankaran II-Man, Sundiata's half-brother, was placed on the throne, even though the prophecy suggested Sundiata was destined to rule. The environment in the palace became increasingly hostile. Sogolan and her children endured insults daily. In Mandinka oral tradition, it is said that Sogolan cried many nights because of the humiliation. But everything changed one day when Sogolan was insulted in public. She cried bitterly, and young Sundiata, still unable to walk, felt deeply ashamed. He made a decision that would change his life forever. He asked a blacksmith to forge a strong iron rod, a mighty staff. With great effort, Sundiata used the rod to pull himself upright. It was said that the rod bent under the force, and as he stood tall for the first time, people gasped in amazement. From that moment, Sundiata walked. And not only did he walk, he began to grow strong, skilled, intelligent, and respected. The boy who was mocked as handicapped became a symbol of resilience and destiny. But this did not solve the larger problem. Kangaba was becoming unsafe. Dankaran Tuman and his mother felt threatened. The rivalry intensified. Eventually, Sogolon decided to leave Kangaba with her children. This was not just an escape. It was an exile that would shape Sundiata's character and future leadership. During their long years in exile, Sundiata traveled across several kingdoms, including Wagadu, Mima, and others. Everywhere he went, he learned something new: politics, warfare, hunting, diplomacy, spirituality, and leadership. Kings admired him. Young men followed him. People recognized that he was not just another prince, he was a leader in the making. This exile period also exposed Sundiata to the political climate of the region. While he was growing stronger, another power was rising, and threatening all the small Mandinka states. This power was the Sosso Kingdom, led by a fearsome and ruthless ruler named Sumanguru Kante. Sumanguru had conquered many territories. He imposed heavy taxes, punished disobedience harshly, and was feared by all. He conquered Kangaba as well, humiliating Dankaran Tuman and bringing great suffering to the Mandinka people. Under Sosso rule, the Mandinka endured oppression, fear, and economic hardship. The people of Kangaba remembered the prophecy. They remembered the story of the boy who learned to walk with an iron rod. They remembered Sundiata. And so, they sent messengers across the region to find him. Their message was simple: come home. We need you. You are our last hope. Sundiata accepted the call. What followed was a political and military campaign that united the Mandinka states for the first time in history. Kings who had met Sundiata during his exile supported him. Young warriors rallied behind him. Merchants, hunters, and ordinary villagers all joined his cause. It was a moment of unity that had never been seen before. This unity eventually led to one of the most important battles in West African history, the Battle of Kirina, which we will cover in the next chapter. But before that battle, something important happened. Sundiata was proclaimed the Mansa of the Mandinka people. The prophecy had finally come. Full circle. The boy who once crawled on the ground had become the leader destined to liberate his people. By the time Sundiata returned to Kangaba, he was no longer the silent prince in exile. He was a skilled warrior, a charismatic leader, and a symbol of hope. Families trusted him. Warriors respected him. The Mandinka saw in him not just a king, but a hero chosen by destiny. His rise was not only political, it was spiritual. Griots often describe him as the Lion King of Mali, a man whose character embodied strength, wisdom, and courage. His leadership was firm but fair. He valued unity, justice, and collective strength. These values would later become the foundation of the Mali Empire. Before we end this chapter, it is important to understand why Sundiata's story has survived for over 800 years. It is not just because he founded an empire. It is because his story teaches resilience, patience, and destiny. He was a boy who faced mockery, disability, exile, and danger, but he rose above all of it to become one of the greatest rulers in African history. This chapter represents the foundation of Mali's greatness, the rise of a leader shaped by hardship and destiny. If you are enjoying this documentary so far, kindly follow this channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next chapters. This really helps us continue creating powerful African history content. Now that you understand how Sundiata rose, the next video will take you deep into the legendary conflict that defined the future of West Africa, the great confrontation between Sundiata Keita and the Sosso king, Sumanguru Kante. In the meantime, comment, like and subscribe.